Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. In today's episode, we are honored to have Dr. Neha Chatwani, founder of the Workplace Atelier, a dynamic space dedicated to change management, bricolage. In this episode, Dr. Chatwani will dwell into her groundbreaking volume, Organizational Agility, and the impact of identity on knowledge management. We will explore her insights on how organizational identity shapes knowledge management and how it influences agility in today's ever-evolving business environment. Dr. Neha, thank you for accepting our invitation. It's a true delight to have you on this episode.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Deepak. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. Dr. Neha, my first question is, could you tell us about the inspiration behind your book and how its journey began?
That's an excellent place to start. So the book is actually based on a case study, an extensive case study that I did for my doctoral work. The case study takes place in a very well-known NGO that conducts medical emergency help worldwide, actually a Nobel Prize winner organization. I need not say the name. I think by this time, all of your viewers and listeners would have guessed who this is. And I was extremely privileged to have the possibility to gain insight into this organization. An organization I have admired for a long time and that don't have the resources to open their door to research as much as they should because they're busy doing what they do, which is very important. And I can only verify that the organization is a wonderful, wonderful NGO.
Could you explain the core concepts of organizational agility and knowledge management as discussed in your book?
So the reason why I chose to do the research at this NGO is because they are renowned for being very fast and very effective in what they do. So they're often the first people who are in any kind of an emergency situation. They're the first people who turn up and do their medical aid. So I really wanted to deep dive into their understanding of what agility is and how they manage to be the fastest and the most effective in the field in most adverse circumstances, actually. And my understanding of organizational agility in this context was not necessarily about being fast, even though this NGO is, it's about being timely. So fast is not really, a lot of people think agility is about being fast. It's about being timely in accordance to your purpose. And my understanding of organizational agility is that at the heart of it is knowledge. It's learning and knowledge. So if you wanted to have an organizational agility formula, the organizations that are able to sense information within their organization, but also outside their organization, also through suppliers or legislative changes, or even customers, importantly enough, often forgotten, right? Those people, as well as the talent they have inside their organization, if they are able to leverage this knowledge, this skill, this feedback, and rope it into what it is the organization sets out to do, because every organization has a purpose. And I personally believe that even governments can be agile, and find a timely response to the issues that they are facing. It's not about fast, quick, flexible, because fast, quick, flexible means you're a rubber band. You're going to snap back into being a rubber band. Agility has something to do with learning. It has to do with anticipating the challenge and setting up learning in your organization so that you can deal with whatever is going to come, which is why it's about thriving in disruptive times.
Very
So
insightful.
that's the idea of linking organizational agility with knowledge. The definition of knowledge, perhaps in this context, not such a narrow one, although we go back, of course, to Nonaka, I think, with the implicit and the explicit knowledge. Of course, all that is what is expressed as knowledge and wisdom, but also importantly, what is not expressed, what it is we don't seem to know until it is triggered. And if I may add, I think many organizations simply don't know what they know. Coming from the HR field, I can say, recruitment in organizations is always against a profile. It's like a checklist process, but do you have a whole person sitting in front of you who can offer much, much more? And not only they can offer much, much more, they have the ability to learn so much more, right? So there's an enormous potential, I think, that is not being tapped. And this is how I navigated the idea of organizational agility and knowledge management in this book and also in my upcoming book.
Very nice. We would love to hear about your next book. My second question is about, how does an organization's identity influence its approach to managing and leveraging knowledge?
Yeah. So I think first we need to clarify a little bit, what do we mean by identity? Their identity has many different aspects towards it, right? The identity of an organization in particular. I think one thing I want to say is that there is a layer of identity, and that is commonly called culture, that is dynamic. So interestingly enough, a lot of people tell me, this is the culture of our organization. That's the way we do things around here, as if that is sealed in stone. But I think, as we know of many national cultures, as we change our habits in society, things we're doing now, we didn't do 50 years ago, right? And it's become a part of our culture. We don't realize there's an evolutionary side to culture. With identity, it's a little bit different, because identity, just because you change your habits and the way you do things around here, and maybe even change your assumptions, we see also societies becoming more inclusive and changing their assumptions. Identity is a little bit more solid in the sense that it's about your deepest values. And a lot of organizations espouse these values on their websites. In fact, agility can be a value that organizations espouse to. But do they live them? Are they expressed through their behaviors? And what we forget is that these values and this identity and purpose that are espoused to actually navigate decisions, or they should navigate decisions. I, in my career, worked at a central bank at one point, and I remember in a conversation me putting forward an idea of something that we could try out in the organization, and somebody said to me, "We can't do that. We are a central bank." Now, if I had written the book already at that time, which was not the case, I should have gone back and said, what does that really mean? And I think a lot of times in organization, the element of evolutionary culture and identity that is evolving is ignored. And people sit back and say, but we don't do that around here. We do it differently. So the ability to navigate identity is important. And this particular organization, I think, does it extremely well. It actually bases all of the decisions they make. They are very clear about their purpose, humanitarian medical aid, and they don't deny it to anybody. So they move away from a moral stance to a stance that is navigated through their value system. And this helps them make decisions. And this helps them know what to compromise and what not to compromise. And I think a lot of the listeners will probably say, well, honestly speaking, that's fine for an NGO because they are different from, organizations. That I have to dispute that and say, I think that this can work for all organizations. And I have seen organizations also through my work who are able to use their identity in order to navigate their knowledge. and to understand that the way they see decision making and the way they use the knowledge inside the organization is linked to that.
Yeah. In what ways does an organization's self-perception and collective identity affects its ability to respond environmental changes?
Oh, I think it is absolutely linked. I give, the example I just cited, right? If somebody says, oh, no, we can't do that because we're a government or because we are a certain type of organization, I think it begs for the question, what does that really mean, right? So that can be extremely disabling. If you say yourself, I sometimes encourage people to use different words. In a profit-making environment, people speak of customers. In a non-profit environment, people speak of beneficiaries, right? In a governmental environment, you should speak of citizens, maybe. Swap those words around and see how that feels all of a sudden. Right? In a certain way, if you're in a government, you don't have to only speak of citizens, you can speak of customers because we're paying taxes for a service as well as everything else that goes around governance and so on, right? So you can swap the words around to test your thinking. And I think that when you decide to come out of these boxes and you start to realize that actually organizations are quite fungible and we don't have to stick to labelings. Most even for-profit organizations will have some social raison d'etre that they go with, whether it's environment or whether it's something in their community. There's no way you can draw hard lines. Every NGO wants to have more money. The one I investigated has a fair amount of funding available to them because they are just very good at what they do. I would encourage every organization to swap some of the vocabulary they use and see how that feels. And that will enable them to take action.
Very nice. Your book employs a cross-disciplinary approach. How do insights from various fields contribute to a deeper understanding of agility and identity?
So I think many people look at agility and they go, this comes from IT, right? And they're expecting me to speak about, I don't know, sprints and scrums and Kanbans and all the things I cannot speak about, really. Those are all tools, really. And I think it is, Deepak, honestly, is it even possible nowadays to have a conversation about any theme that is impacting us, not only in the business world, but in the world at large, without seeing a multidisciplinary across functional lens? I think the world is too complex for that. So if you're looking at a topic, it is imperative that you have to look at it from different perspectives, right? I don't know how else to answer that question of yours, to be very honest, right? I would not find it encouraging, although I appreciate in-depth singular views. But I think when we're looking to solve complex issues, we need to look at it from a multi-dimensional lens.
Yeah, okay. Can you share some examples or case studies from the book that illustrate impact of organizational identity on knowledge management?
Well, this book itself was one case study, of course, but I do have some examples in other works that I can bring along. So I have met with organizations that use, for example, collective leadership as a lever, right, for introducing organizational agility, because the big question that people have, and now we're already into my new book that is coming up, because when this book was published, a couple of people said to me, it's rather academic and it would be really nice to have a more practical book for lay people as well. So my new book is very much about that. It's about this idea of how do you even get started in organizational agility? And I have stayed away from the temptation to either have a diagnostic tool or to have a 1, 2, 3 template, because in fact, that's not possible. Everybody is more or less agile, and you will never become completely agile and tick that box because you will never stop learning. So if you substitute the word agility for learning and for co-creating and sharing knowledge, then you understand that that approach is not possible. But what you will find if you look at different companies are different examples of how they have specifically learned to share and co-create knowledge in their own context. I spoke to one company, a German company, it's a bottling company, albeit a very small one, but this owner even has a website where he posts new ideas for his company and he shares them largely, not only with his staff, but even with his customers. You can also log in there and follow his strategic thinking and comment on it if you want. And even the lorry drivers who, transport the bottles can have access to it. And I remember when he was telling me about this, because this is one way of getting knowledge, right? The cheapest knowledge you have is what your customers are telling you, but companies are just not really using this, right? I mean, I said to him, this must be crazy, because when I look at how people comment online, it's so, they use it for their amusement. It's not really, not very substantial. And he said, you'll be very surprised that when in this context, people are invited to make serious comments, they actually do. And the idea is that every comment can actually supersede the idea that I presented. It doesn't mean that I need to have the best idea. So this is already a taste of what I call collective leadership. And hence my next book is about organizational agility, collective leadership, and new work, because as we move ahead, I think collective leadership is not only going to be an enabler for agility, but also an enabler for a new type of work, which will include asynchronized work, artificial intelligence, purposeful work, engagement, etc. So I think I've given you a very complex answer to this question, but I think you can view examples of how organizations have approached agility. And one final remark on this, agility is not about copying best practices. This is really important because every organization is different. Every organization is very different and should tap into their own uniqueness of talent in order to create their own agenda for learning agility, continual or reiterative learning of agility. Therefore, I think it's interesting to talk about different case studies, but only for our amusement, to be very honest. Because at the end of the day, this website may work for this one gentleman in the bottling company in Germany, but it might not be the right approach for another company because of size, because of what they do is different, right? So it is, I think, interesting to look at these examples, to notice that it's possible. So for encouragement, if you like, but not necessarily for best practice or imitation. Agility is very much about next practice, right? So it's also a very visionary way of looking at things, not so much looking backward into the best practice, the lessons learned, but also imagining what could still be possible. And I think that is why we struggle so much with it, because it's a very different way of looking at the world, right? And we tend to get very stuck into what happened and maybe we shouldn't do it that way in the future and so on. But the truth is that whatever is coming in the future is not going to be the same context as the past. So that's not going to happen again anyway. but you'll make new mistakes. And that's just going to happen, irrespective of whichever best practice you decide to imitate. There's a very different mindset to be agile.
Yeah, very interesting. Could you share some core insights from your upcoming book, if I may ask you?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier on, the upcoming book is going to be called Thriving in Disruption, Organizational Agility, Collective Leadership, and New Work. I am exploring the definition of organizational agility further as I have described it today. And I am suggesting that collective leadership is one of the tools that can be used to leverage the knowledge in the organizations. Again, collective leadership, I think, is a concept that is quite misunderstood. I think one group of people feel that's all anarchic. Nobody's a leader, or everybody's a leader, or how does that work? I describe what collective leadership really is. And basically, the bottom line is that it demands a shift from thinking that one person is a leader all the time. Even if you have a formal appointed leader, that style of leadership could mean that you are able to share that leadership depending on what is needed in the situation. And we have many examples of this. And I will share the metaphor that I use in the book, and that is a football team or a soccer team for the American listeners. Everybody in the team is allowed to shoot a goal. Just because you shoot a goal, you're not going to become the captain of the team. That's not necessarily the case. There are football teams where the goalie is the captain, right? So the team shows clearly shooting a goal is important, of course, but saving a goal is equally important. And when you watch these players, the probability of scoring a goal increases when they pass the ball. So not when they keep it to themselves, but when they learn to pass, when they learn to appreciate the strengths of the other people in the team, when they keep an eye out to where the players are standing, where they can pass. It's very contextual. So in sports, we see a lot of collective leadership, actually. Strangely, at the workplace, that completely dissolves. In sports, we also see two tennis players who have competed viciously go to the net and shake hands. At the workplace, we start to build walls around silos. So I think there is a potential. Whenever somebody says to me, you're very idealistic and that's not how the business world works, I tell them, we have lots of examples in our societies on how this can work. And I use, in fact, this metaphor of the sports team that, and just because they win something, it doesn't mean they stop practicing. No, they keep practicing. And agility is about that. You keep learning so that when that Titanic moment comes, everybody knows what to do. It's not a Titanic moment, right? And that's the same for the football team. When they finally qualify for the World Cup, hey, that's not a big deal because they've been practicing for it all the time. And at the same time, the ability to take on new players, if one player is injured, and to understand that it's contextual and that it's not about the individual, because the individual cannot win the game on their own. It's impossible, right? And I think we need to learn this in organizations as well. So that's my. I'm not going to say more about the book now. It's a work in progress, but yeah, it will be out there pretty soon, I think, and I'll be happy to talk more about it at that time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Neha. What are some common challenges organizations face when trying to align their identity with their knowledge management practices?
So I think I think there are different ways that organizations try and do this. Well, I think one of the most popular ways is to build databases of some sort. And No, there's no problem with building databases, but I think we both know that they get very lame if they're not maintained in the way they're supposed to be maintained. And the big question is what you really want to put in this database, and who is going to maintain it. So I have seen a lot of databases that have started with great intentions and have, petered out somewhere. The problem with knowledge is that it's not all tangible, is it? So we also have to appreciate that there is a lot of knowledge that is dormant. And I think one of the best ways to actually share and also co-create knowledge in organizations is to have a culture of dialogue. We have, and this goes down to the leadership question, which is why I talk about collective leadership, right? We have a lot of wisdom in organizations that goes untapped because people don't feel they can share their ideas. They're not in an environment where they can. I think we've all experienced this. We've all experienced it. So I think the idea here is to develop the kind of leadership culture inside organizations so that people can share their knowledge and they feel free to bring forward their ideas without any fear or reprimand. And sometimes they can also bring forward ideas that sound silly, but maybe could be quite innovative. And it's not only about creating that safe space for people to speak, but it's also about creating a space that people know how to listen. And I think this has been underestimated in the last years, where people are often invited to go to presentation trainings. And that's all about learning how to present yourself and lobby your idea and convince other people and negotiate. And I think we should go for trainings where people learn how to listen and collaborate and co-create. Because nobody owns knowledge. And knowledge is only useful when we can sit together and do something with it that helps everybody, really. And I think the idea of single leadership is also challenged because one person cannot have all of that wisdom. The group has much more wisdom as a collective than one single person. So if we can learn to if you like, reduce the ego and the politics of knowledge, because in many organizations, the leadership just closes the door. They keep things to themselves. They don't share it in the organization. If you don't share the strategy with your workers, how are they going to come up with the ideas that would help the organization move forward? But knowledge is seen as, swinging power, and this is not knowledge anymore. This is holding information that I think needs to stop. There's a lot of that as well in organizations. If you share, then the other person may have an idea that helps you both grow an even better idea. And, when I work with organizations, I play this, with them in team buildings and so on. And you can see that. You can see that they all come with their own idea. They think they have to lobby it. And then all of a sudden in the room, we start creating a third idea that nobody ever thought of before. And that's actually the one that everybody thinks is going to work, So it's what we know. We just have to do it with more consciousness, I think.
How can practitioners apply the insights from your book to improve their organization's agility and knowledge management?
Aside reading my books, which I think was the first step, of course. No, I think the dialogue inside the organization is really important. So and I mentioned this in my new book, I think very few people in management or in team lead roles, leaders, spend much time thinking about their own leadership. And I think there is a critical question, and I borrow the headline from a Harvard Business Review article that came out many years ago. Why should anybody be led by you? And collective leadership, everybody should ask themselves this question. And I think leaders should ask themselves this question, even in a traditional and conventional organization. We need to have some form of self-reflection. We tend to be very much about, okay, now you've been promoted to this role, you need to go off and get some leadership training. The promotion to the role is a reward for work that has been done, does not necessarily mean that this person is going to be effective as a leader or as a manager or whatever that role is. And I think there's no space to self-reflect. So as a practitioner, I think self-reflection is a big deal, actually. You know, asking the question, why are we doing this? For what purpose? Is there another way of doing this? What are the assumptions I'm making when I make these decisions? Are these the correct ones? Who else can I involve in the process? And understanding that that is also leadership, but is a different type of leadership. I think these are the steps I would take. Mapping out, I talk in my new book about the guiding star, mapping out clearly what this organization is trying to achieve, why it's trying to achieve it, how this impacts the people that are affected. There are 5 prongs. I don't want to go into all the details now, but clarity is important and dialogue is important. And I think many times in organizations, people don't have that as much as they could have it. So, you know, a story comes to mind. I once worked with a facilities management team in a very large organization, and they were rather demotivated. They kept telling me, oh, their work is to move desks around and prepare offices for newcomers and enlarge offices for promoted persons, etc. And then, you know, I said to them, is that really the purpose of, you know, of your work? And they couldn't get out of this rut until I suggested to them, don't you feel that you support people here by enabling safe workspaces? I mean, you know, you are the ones who know how an office should be set up so that the files are not falling on people's heads. And, you know, there is some know-how behind it. It's not just a technical job. And all of a sudden, their perception of their work shifted enormously because they saw themselves in a bigger context and also as an important part of that puzzle. I mean, they obviously did not have the professional technical skill set of this organization. They were seen to be doing more of a menial job, but it was a very important job because it was about the safety of people in their offices, right? And giving them the tools that they need to work. So I think a lot more deeper thinking has to go into organizations, which is not only based on strategic goals referring to sales targets and things like this. I think that this discussion, which is about identity, will also increase and enable higher productivity to reach all the other business targets that organizations aim for. But the discussion needs to take place. And most leadership will not discuss leadership once they have reached that level, right? And they should.
Yeah. What emerging trends in organizational identity and knowledge management do you foresee impacting agility in the future?
So I think agility, even though the word is perhaps hyped and a little borne out, stays on our menu, so to speak, because the world is evolving rapidly, I think. And it's not only AI. I think we see a lot of volatility in the business world. I'm not into the business of, you know, forecasting economic trends or anything, but I am seeing a lot of startup companies that are working remotely. So it's beyond the hybrid. They're actually working remotely, and asynchronous type of work where people are not necessarily in the same time zone. They are getting information from meetings, for example, through recordings. I think we're going to have to learn how to manage work in this way. So it's a very different kind of, it's even beyond what we've experienced after COVID. AI will play a role, I think, for sure, taking away a lot of the routine work, even for knowledge workers. I'm sure that, Deepak, you have used ChatGPT at one point in your life and asked a question and been astounded at, this one pager of beautifully written text you get as an answer. It's not perfect, for sure. It needs, of course, more depth and more, and that's going back to your topic of this cross-disciplinary. It needs more cross-disciplinary insight, which is where I think the human is important and human knowledge is important. But we will need to look at how this will change the way we work. And finally, I quote an HR manager at a very successful scaling startup here in Austria. She said to me, with this happening, we probably will also need to focus a little bit on well-being of our workers, because all of these boring, mundane, routine tasks we use in the workday, often to relax our minds that are buzzing to do more innovative work. And she said, and when this mundane work goes away, the pressure to constantly produce at a higher intellectual level and do more critical thinking increases maybe as a demand, but is that realistic? So I think we're going to feel challenged in the future because I think most companies know how competitive the business world has become and how much the focus is going to be on the best talent. Even if there will be plenty of talent available, is it relevant and is it going to be as innovative? Which, of course, brings me back to collective leadership, because that's also interesting from the point of view of well-being of workers, because there are many shoulders and not only one shoulder. And we are already experiencing middle management under a lot of pressure. Also to engage with the new generation of workers that sets different demands in the workplace, and more individualization of work, more democratization of work, etc. So I see the topic of agility as a primary topic going ahead. I also believe we're going to have to look at different ways of how it can be implemented in organizations. I'm offering the collective leadership path. I'm offering the path of looking at organizational identities and knowledge in particular. I'm sure that there are other pathways as well.
Yeah. Dr. Neha, could you share one key message from your book that our listeners would like to implement in their professional career? A single message. It's the last question, Dr. Neha.
It's so difficult to narrow it down to one key message. But I think my key message would be organizations do not know what they know. And there is enormous potential in this. And one of the pathways to this is an increased humanization of work, because humans are the ones who hold the knowledge. They are the ones who can co-create the knowledge and the wisdom that organizations need. Therefore, my one piece of wisdom, if you like, would be to request organizations to treat their human workers who carry this knowledge and who should be encouraged to share and to co-create this future knowledge as well in a way that will enable them to do so.
Yeah. As we wrap up this insightful episode of the Business Talk podcast, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Dr. Neha Chatwani for sharing her profound expertise with us today. The conversation around organizational agility and the role of identity in knowledge management has provided us with valuable perspectives that are both thought-provoking and actionable. Dr. Chatwani, your work at the Workplace Atelier and your contributions to the field are truly inspiring. It's been an honor to have you with us, and I am sure our listeners have gained a wealth of knowledge from your insights. Thank you so much, Dr. Neha, and looking forward to reading your next book.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much.